Hi, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. I am so happy to be here with Ashan Willy, who is the CEO of New Relic. I know he's a highly anticipated guest on this show. So let me just bring you forward and whoops, that's a little far forward. Let's go here. Thanks for joining us today.
Karen, my pleasure, and thanks for having me on this platform.
Terrific. So a lot of things to talk about today, but I'd like to start with, you're a new CEO, so I want to get to that sort of I'll say new to New Relic, not a new CEO in general. But I want to start with New Relic's acquisition in mid-23 by Francisco Partners and TPG for $6.5 billion. Typically, when that happens, there's some sort of transition that is in mind. Could you talk a bit about sort of what's going on with that, what the goal was in terms of this acquisition?
Yeah, no, happy to do that, Karen. And I am the transition, I suppose.
You are the transition. Okay, that's an easy answer.
But let's talk to that. Yes, so two private equity firms, Francisco Partners and TPG, both very big players in the software market in general, bought New Relic, as you mentioned, for $6.5 billion. Now, there's a couple of different theses when you go to private equity, and the usual thesis has been, look, private equity buys firms that are struggling, are able to get it to profitability, take sort of cash flow. So that's sort of one thesis. But as you know, Karen, I think in the last few years, private equity has been responsible for over 70% of the transactions. So as the transactions have happened in the market, what they have gone after growth companies. And so they think, hey, the company can grow better outside of the public glare than in the public glare. And that was a theory for New Relic. And so that's the transition for us. Going private, we made some business model changes, and we're able to, the idea is to grow it in the private market outside the public glare.
Okay. Yeah. So not having to have the maybe very focused, quarterly focused specifics that happen in the public arena.
Yeah. I would just add one more thing there. I had a similar journey at my prior company, where I ran a cybersecurity company called Proofpoint, where they took it private, and we were able to grow it in pretty significant fashion outside the public glare. So the same thesis here.
All right. So you've been in your new role here at New Relic for just over 90 days. I'm really curious to hear sort of what have you learned during that time? I imagine you had some expectations coming in, and then there's always reality once you get in the door. So sort of what have you learned, and what are you most excited about in terms of this opportunity?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with the second question first,
Sure.
because that's what drew me to New Relic. So first, the market that New Relic is in is a growing market. It's a significantly growing market. The market is called an observability market, and I'll explain to the viewers what that means a little bit later. But it's the observability market. It's about 15 to 20 billion, depending on who you talk to, but it's growing to about 37 billion in 2027. So it's growing significantly, and so you've got a great market, and there are several reasons it's growing. The biggest reason it's growing is because more and more companies are making not just 1, 2, 30%, 40%, but all their software applications are moving to the cloud, and that means you've got to observe it. And so that's the reason. So very good market. The second thing that's proven to be true is that New Relic pioneered this space back in 2008 and have made some significant investments in what we feel is sort of the next leap, and so all of that's true. So that's the opportunity for us, right? And so New Relic's done a really good job there. And what I've learned, as I came in, and I think most CEOs do this, but the first thing you do is get out to your customers, right? So I've talked to about 100 plus customers since I've been here, and they validated that, right? The market's growing, New Relic's in a really good position, and they also feel we are going where the market needs to be, the whole SaaS market, and that's into more platform, more consumption-based pricing or business model, if you will. So all of those are underlies for the opportunity.
Okay. I'm thinking about 100 customers in 90 days. That's
Yeah.
That's a lot of listening to what's going on out there. How about internally? What did you discover internally from those that you've talked to?
Yeah, so I think internally, a few things I think have happened in New Relic. First, there's a lot of very, very passionate. They call themselves relics, right? We call ourselves relics, right? So it's a funny story on that. If you'll indulge me a
Yes.
little bit,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, it's the you ever heard the old saying, behind every successful American software company are some damn good Canadians. Uh,
No, but I like it.
I am an I just made that up, but it is the founder for us is essentially is a gentleman by the name of Lou Cern, and he started the company. He's Canadian. He started the company in 2008. I think his second company that he started in this space. And the word New Relic was sort of an anagram, right, of his name. And that's how you got to
Wow.
New Relic. And so you had some relics. And the reason I bring this up is, as you asked what I learned internally, I got to spend some time. Actually, yesterday I was in one of our development centers, and I spent some time with some of the relics who've been here 10 plus years, right? And they're just
Mm.
very passionate about the space. So we've got a very, very passionate group. And internally, what I've learned is the company has gone through what I think is a very, very difficult business model
Mhm.
change in the
Yeah.
public, right? And you can almost akin it to when Adobe went from perpetual to subscription, right?
Mm.
They had to kind of they did it wonderfully, of course, but they signal to the market. That's a tough transition, right?
Yeah.
And so New Relic's gone from sort of where we think the next phase is going in this market, which is they've gone from subscription to consumption. And
Mm.
as they've done that in the public eye, so what I've learned internally is they would have done some things differently, but are now at a point where we can kind of explode and unleash as a result. Right?
Yeah, I want to pull another thread there without leading us too far afield. So I have a lot of clients who are SaaS clients, and of course, SaaS is like today's modern business model, I think. What is it about consumption that makes it more attractive than sort of a super attractive SaaS model?
Yeah, so if you think about, and maybe a couple of analogies on here, right, is when we moved from sort of perpetual to subscription,
Hmm.
there was that famous book, Why Buy the Cow When You Can Buy the Milk,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
Right.
that was the whole I pay for something and there were several advantages towards going there, right? I get
Mm.
cloud-based services. I pay on a monthly basis or an annual basis, and so that was sort of the first bit. In subscription, though, you are still paying for things that you may not use, right?
Mm.
So I mean, just a very simple analogy is if you subscribe to your set of TV channels, you pay for all of it, regardless of how much you use. Now, the idea is that you can, in the consumer world, figure this out. The consumer world said, look, I can go buy a stream, right? I can buy just things that I want, right? Whether it's
Mhm.
music I want, whether it's media I want. That hasn't been the case in the enterprise software
Mm.
space. The idea is that rather than go and just pay for sort of a suite, can I pay for the things that I actually use? And
Mhm.
that's not easy because to solve an enterprise standpoint, what metric do you use? How do I ensure predictability? Because people have budgets.
All right.
So all of those things have to have been worked on. And that's what we've been working on for the last few years.
Okay. Sorry for any background noise. I live in an area with a lot of golfers, professional golfers, and so there are, I think you probably do too. Anyway, there are helicopters that fly over from time to time as they're coming
Yes.
and going from their golf tournaments. Yes. Okay. So that makes sense. So what are your visions and strategies for leading New Relic in this new chapter?
Yeah. So a couple of things. First, let me maybe, if you will, Karen, talk about what observability means, because just to the
Absolutely. Yeah.
layperson, I mean, I didn't know what it was, right? I mean, I was involved in it several decades ago, and then so in a nutshell, it's the following, right? If you think about as more and more companies have become digital, right? Not just the native digital companies, but bricks and mortar, we've moved
Mm.
online. Everything has become much more magnified in terms of consequence. So, for example, we have a retail customer who on Black Friday, their websites go from 1 request per second to 300 requests per second, right? Because they're shopping, right? And for every second that site's down, it means lost sales, the opportunity to go to a competitor. That's an example. This streaming platform is a perfect example, right? You don't want any glitches, right, on this streaming platform, right? When Paramount streamed the Super Bowl, as an example, which was the largest domestic view in an absolute sense in US history. It had 130 million viewers overall for the Super Bowl. Now, I think as a percentage, the moon landing got higher, right? As a percentage, right? As a proportion. But this was
although it was the moon landing, I think we can understand.
It was the moon landing. Chiefs winning a American World Cup sport or something, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But you're totally right. But the point is, those have to go flawlessly, right? And so that's sort of one piece, the business piece. The technology piece is what's happened, Karen, is building those applications have become more complicated than ever. The reason that is because everything's moved in the cloud. You build with microservices, you build through multiple clouds. You could be in Azure, you could be in AWS, you could be in GCP, the geographic pieces. So stitching all of that together and finding out what's going wrong or what's going right on a real-time basis is very difficult. And so what observability players like ourselves, leading observability players, we're able to stitch all of that together and tell you if there's a problem before the problem occurs. So that's observability, right? And so where are we going as a result? Lucerne invented the space, right? And so he invented the space back in 2008. And essentially, we made it a big data problem, right? So look, if we can get a bunch of data, we can then tell you what's going on with your platform and how to thwart any issues ahead of it. And so where are we going? The market, there's a few different areas in terms of a few different areas. One is the observability space overall is looking at 3 major trends. The first is AI, right? Everyone is sort of, the answer is AI. What's the question, right? Type thing is the thing. So there's a big space. There's a big area where we're going to play there, and we were the first to release AI capabilities in this space. The second is we want to democratize observability. There are roughly about 50 million engineers out there. Only about 2 million are using observability, and so there's a huge opportunity for us to democratize, get more people to use it. Not just with the practitioners, but also the business owners, because as a business owner, you'd want to know if your application is up on Black Friday or not. And then I think the third area where you'll see us move into is there's some very logical adjacent spaces like cybersecurity, right? That you'll see observability move into. So we're big players in all 3.
Great. Oh, thanks for making that so understandable. You mentioned Super Bowl, Black Friday. How do you work with giants like Paramount and Verizon and obviously your retail customers to get ready for high traffic events like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Now, look, I mean, I wish, and I do say the product speaks for itself. It's a really good product, and people have built processes around it. However, big events like that, we internally have essentially a hyper vigilant mode that we have in which for something like a Super Bowl or a Black Friday or whatever, Formula One streaming event, whatever that is, right? Those type of events, we have a process in which we do some pre-checks with the customer. We're standing by with everything that we can to support those type of events. They're just too high stakes for us not to.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to shift a little bit and move from New Relic to sort of your leadership of New Relic, because I know a lot of people who watch this are very interested in leadership in addition to leadership strategy. Could you talk a bit about sort of your leadership journey? I think you started maybe as a systems engineer, if my research was right.
Yeah, that's right. So maybe a personal journey, and from a personal journey standpoint, I started out in I mean, I started way back in the bowels of engineering, way back, right? And then I moved to more customer facing type roles as a systems engineer, more in the go to market space. But
Mhm.
that just from an overall leadership standpoint, I think, Karen, I've taken as many jobs in many areas as I could just to learn. And so I ran everything
Wow.
from just strategy. I ran channels for a little while. I've run sales for a bit. I've run product. I've run engineering just to get a good, well-rounded view. So I did take a few lateral moves, quite a few to do that, right? And sometimes in some cases, even lateral and down, right? But the
Mhm.
learnings were invaluable, right? It rounds you out. The big thing you learn is you've really got to walk in a person's shoes to understand these
Yeah.
particular functions. And it is I just a case in point, when I ran sales, I had worked around channels for over a decade, and I thought I knew the job. And then until I took the job and realized, look, what I see is on the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole set of
Mm.
things that are required. But so my leadership journey has been one of two things. One is I've been able to take a lot of cross-functional type roles. The second is I have moved to different sizes of companies at different at different stages in their maturity. So, I was at big companies like Cisco. So you see what great is, especially early on, right? Where with Cisco, so you saw what great was early on, and you were at Compaq, right? So you saw what great was early on, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's
I've
that's
spent I've spent the last 20 years trying to recreate it. So,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
once you have an experience like that, good for you.
Yeah. And then I've been able to move smaller to mid-sized and smaller across the board, which has allowed me to take all those skills. I know what great is, but I also know what it takes to sort of move from a smaller company to a mid-sized to a bigger company. And so
Right.
that's also skill, right?
All right. I always think it's interesting to hear how people chose their jobs, right? So, because I think someone starting on their leadership career, there are just lots of options, and you're afraid you're going to make a mistake. And I have one client who chose influence, right? He said, I always took the job that would give me the most influence, not the
Mm,
most money. And he ended up as a CEO and is a very successful one. And here you've chosen out of sort of becoming more well-rounded, having a broader, better view of the organization. So I'm also curious. Senior leadership, I think one of the most underrated competencies of a good senior leader is the ability to deal with ambiguity. So I think there's this combination of dealing with ambiguity plus a bias for action. So you have to
mm,
hold this sort of tension of
mm.
not knowing but needing to do something. How do you deal with that, or how is ambiguity sort of part of your leadership?
Yeah, it is. It is, as they say, right? Tough problems roll upwards, right? And so you have to deal with ambiguity. I would say the following, Karen. I think I there's a couple of things you have to be able to learn from the past, but
Mm,
not bring the same template and playbook and apply it to every situation. The situation, a different situation, right? I just don't think. I think I've seen a lot of leaders fail in which they've said, "Look, this is a playbook I applied here. Let me apply the same playbook here without making any adjustments, understanding the environment." So I think the first thing I would say around just dealing with an ambiguity piece is it's important, and maybe just a click back here. I think it's important to find out what makes whatever situation or whatever company special first. It's really
mm.
important. I use a concept called appreciative inquiry, which is
Sure. Yeah.
which sounds you're very familiar with, but
I have
just to
training. Yeah.
yeah, but I learned that very early on, and I thought that was just a great technique. Find out all the things that are right about the,
Yeah.
and it just works well. People open up to you, right? When they, because when you have a new person coming in, they're thinking, well, this person's got new ideas, but what made you successful, right? And you kind of go there, and then you can find areas that help. With respect to ambiguity, I think the first thing is you have to be comfortable in getting to a decision that is not going to be always right. You
Mhm.
just have to get comfortable with that. But you also have to do the work to understand that you're making the best decision with people you trust, with all the information you have. And then once you make that decision, you play out that decision, but not be afraid to pivot. And I think the key thing for me on that, kind of key learning for me is, if you haven't gone the right direction, the genius is to figure out, well, is it that I'm not executing on that appropriately, or is it that the decision itself was wrong and I've got to pivot? And that takes a bit of genius on that piece to figure that out, right? But yeah, I mean, that's sort of, it's day to day. It's day to day, right? As you become a CEO, you get executive leadership, you're paid to deal with that ambiguity.
Yeah, exactly. Certainty was left behind. So thanks. It was a very lucid way to describe that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And so my last question for you, Ashan, has to do with sort of the 2x2 matrix, which up and to the right is the slogan for my consulting business, because that's the spot on the 2x2 matrix where we always want to be. Was there a moment or an event, maybe a job in your career when you knew that you were going to be successful, when you were sort of you knew you were moving up into the right?
I don't. Yeah, I would say that. If I were to recall, it's a good question. It's a good question. It made me think about this one, right? And so if I think through, I think the big, a couple of things for me. The first is I keep a pretty, I'd say a relatively good sized mentor group, right? And that mentor group are people from all walks of life, from different areas in life, and some of them are executive coaches, some of them are ex-CEOs, some of them frankly are at different levels in different companies. And I think just over time they have told me, as I talk to them, how I've evolved, right? And then understanding how you've evolved started to make you think that, look, you can be successful, right? I mean, it's you do all of these Myers-Briggs types tests, and they sort of put you in a box here and there, but it sort of assumes that you can't move. I mean, in the 2x2 matrix, it assumes that you can't move from any of that matrix up there. And that's not true at all, right? I mean, we're very adaptable beings, and as long as we sort of learn. And I think that was a big piece from a mentorship group. And then the other thing, Karen, to be just really specific, is when you get you see success, right? You're able to see success in different things, whether it's doubling a company size, whether it's moving into a new market, getting a new acquisition, or any of that sort of little success. When you kind of look back at all those composite success pieces, and you look back and say, well, look, I think I have something here.
Yeah, terrific. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're talking with Ashan Willy, who's the new CEO of New Relic. I learned a lot, and I'm sure all those who are listening have as well. Thanks again for the time, and best of luck to you and your team.
Thank you, Karen. My pleasure.